Hey guys, Mysopods and more with me. I hope everything is going well with you. You're taking care of yourselves and the ones you love. If you don't like political discussions, please leave right now because that's what this entire video is about. And I don't want to sour you to any of that. If you're not here for that. If you're here for that, welcome. Because I enjoy that. I like people who are here to, challenge themselves in certain ways. I'm not going to do much of this on the channel, but this just kind of spontaneously happened. So this is an excerpt from a live stream, and before I hop into that, I want to point out one thing, and it's very important to me. You'll hear me talk about my position on what kids should learn about slavery and history and things like that, because context matters. For example, if we're talking about slavery and war and politics, I don't think it's unfair to have my children learn about the Civil War, why it was fought, when it started, who was on what side, our president versus the Confederate president, the date that it ended, all of those things, dates wars were fought if you think that's important. But talking about nuances and humanity and the morality and the history of slavery and the context of where it is in the continuum of slavery as it's been around almost continuously throughout human history, those are things that I don't believe that we should ignorantly defer to authority. I don't think certain topics like that should be taught to kids universally. And what I mean is, I have 3 children. My oldest at 10 years old may be able to process it, or any topic, whatever you want to, math, but I'm talking about nuanced things. My oldest at 10 years old may not be able to process what my middle one could at 10 years old, and my youngest one coming up may not, similar to my oldest. I may have to wait to explore certain topics until they're 11 or 12. So certain things like that are not things we need to universally press on the innocence of children, or those that can't understand it, whether it's innocence or a lack of intelligence, if you want to sound partially mean, but a lack of experience or knowledge base to understand those concepts. I don't think those are things that should be taught at school. Now, maybe higher education, because again, now as a parent, as a parent, I can dictate that, but also generally speaking, when you go to college, you're supposed to be an adult, and able to make those decisions at that intelligence level. But I don't think those are things that should be forced upon universally someone because they're an arbitrary age that you or some other person who is in some position thinks my children should be able to accept things. Whether it's religion, sex, all of those can be taught in an educational and fundamental, substantive way that is morally free, ethical free, that are just numbers, dates, things like that. Now, when you start getting into the morality of things, the nuances, the gray areas, again, I'm fascinated with thresholds, when things are and cease to be a certain thing. Those are things for more nuanced people who basically opt in for it. They're not forced to go and say, hey, you want to know about what happened with slavery? Oh, hey, you want sexism? Oh, hey, you want to know what happened to racism? And this date, blah, 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 blah. Some people they're not ready for it. Some people, again, a lot of issues, sadly, people don't kind of come into until they have children or until something happens where it directly impacts them. But I'm not going to be the one to criticize and condemn someone because they came to the same position I am a different way or at a different date. I should just be thankful that they're there at that same position and that they're no longer at that whatever negative position they were at before. But in all this, my main point is, when I'm talking about teaching my kids these things, I'm not talking about forcing them to be taught in schools and forcing them to be taught to your kids at some age or not to be taught. Again, that should be up to you as the parent, these more nuanced things. Again, whether you do it via yourself, by sending them to higher education, by YouTube videos, via religion, whatever the process is, do it. But again, do it as the parent. Don't defer that to the government, to some entity, because again, that's when now you start getting, well, why are they teaching this? Is that history? What does that have to do with science? That's math? What does that have to do with math? And again, so I want to keep that away from my children until the point that they are ready to, that I'm ready to introduce them to it. You don't know my kids, you don't know them, and I can definitely tell you this: you may know more about my kids as someone who watches my YouTube videos than the government people who are trying to make laws on what my kids need and need to not do. So again, keep those laws off of my kids, please. What's funny is also, and this is again in today's spectrum of the government, history to me is so important. The racism, the sexism, the wars, the atrocities, all of that, because again, we're going to repeat those same things if we don't have the context to what is history. And I find it funny that again, to be clear, I'm not a Republican, so I'm not pro-Republican, but I'm not going to lie about the Democratic Party and the fact that they were pro-slavery. Pro-sexism, anti-immigrant, anti-anything that's good at every point of their history. And what I'm getting at is history is important. And I heard in the news today, you'll get a kick out of this, Ninja. I'm sorry, it was in the press briefing, because again, I watch the press briefing every day. It was either yesterday or the day before about the government being called out because in light of the COVID lockdowns, forced lockdowns, kids are like 40 to 60% less proficient in American history.
Some data came out showing that 8th grade test scores in U.S. history reached their lowest levels on record. What can the administration do to help kids catch up who lost so much during the pandemic?
Look, as you just said, kids have lost so much in the pandemic.
And I'm thinking, wow, the Democrats love that because they're not learning about how my grandkids, my grandfather, their grandfather was put in an internment camp by Democrats.
My father came from Japan in 1905. He was 15 when he immigrated from Japan. He worked until he was able to actually build a store.
Ken knew what it would lead to, just like he guessed. The president said the evil Japanese in our home country would be locked away. They gave Ken a couple of days to get his whole life packed in 2 bags. Just 2 bags, couldn't even pack his clothes. Some folks didn't even have a suitcase to pack anything in, so 2 trash bags is all they gave them. And when the kids asked Mom, where are we going? Nobody even knew what to say to them. Ken didn't want to lie, he said the U.S. is looking for spies. So we have to live in a place called Manzanar, where a lot of Japanese people are.
When we first got back from camp, it was pretty bad.
That 15-kiloton blast put an end to the war pretty fast. 2 cities were blown to bits. The end of the war came quick, and Ken got out big hopes of a normal life with his kids and his wife. But then they got back to their home, and what they saw made him feel so alone. These people had trashed every room, smashed in the windows and bashed in the doors, written on the walls and the floor, Japs not welcome anymore.
As soon as war broke out, the FBI came and they just come to the house and you have to come. All the Japanese have to go. They took Mr. Nii. People couldn't understand why they had to take him because he's just innocent laborer.
Stop it, don't look at the gunman. You don't want to get the soldiers wondering if you're gonna run or not, because if you run then you might get shot. Other than that, try not to think about it. Try not to worry about it being so crowded. But someday we'll get out. Someday.
I remember my husband said, we're going to stay till last. Then my husband died before they closed the camp.
But in the back of his mind, he wanted his family's life saved. Prisoners of war in their own damn country, what for?
My grandmother couldn't vote for a time because Democrats didn't want my grandmother to vote. So now Democrats have this mysterious way to make my children stop learning about how Democrats didn't want my daughters to vote, locked my children's family in internment camps, were pro-racist, voted against freeing the slaves, voted against equal opportunity, voted against all the acts that the suffragists were pushing for in terms of equality in the workplace. Democrats were against all of that, and now they set up this system to make my daughters, my minority daughters, forget about what they did to people who look like my daughters, who are the same gender as my daughters, to people who spoke out against that. It's fascinating the way that works out, that they can all of a sudden make kids want history to vanish when that kind of stuff. And the important thing to me is, left or right, I don't care. I want my kids to know we did that. Americans locked Japanese people in internment camps because they were wrong. That's it. They made a decision that was wrong at the time. I talk a lot about COVID lockdowns and fear. Why did we lock Japanese people away? Because we were scared.
When everybody was afraid of the Germans, afraid of the Japs, but most of all afraid of a homeland attack. And that morning when Ken went out on the doormat, his world went black, cause...
And people scared people so much to say, yeah, I know we're going to compromise our freedom and our integrity and that Constitution, but I'm really, really scared. So I'll compromise that right now. I don't want my daughters ever to do that again. That, again, is why, left or right, I don't care. I want my kids to see the things that we did in places and learn that history and understand what it means to not go back to that place. Not go back to where... Oh, I think that was a cormorant. That was the quickest aside. I'm so sorry. I'm debating between going, but that was a big train derailment. I think I was about done anyway, but that's a big thing, and you had a couple of comments. And that's why I say that that's the most important thing about history. I mean, I was talking to my sister. John Kirby is a prior Navy admiral. I forget his position, but he's like, he's not Secretary of Defense, but he's high up there in the department under Biden. And I'm sitting here listening to this. Again, it's insulting to me as a Marine. We're a department of the Navy. I'm not smart by any means. This guy should be smart. He went to the Navy college, got a degree to become a Navy officer. And I'm listening to this guy verbally slap me in the face and pretend history doesn't exist. Again, I'm sorry to vent about politics, but I appreciate you listening, Ninja. So he's up there talking about Ukraine and the lessons we learned from Ukraine. And they specifically released this report the Friday before Easter when no one would care about it. This little several-page book about lessons learned from Iraq, or from Ukraine. I sound like Biden now. Iraq, Ukraine, same thing. But the lessons we learned from there are that wars are not always kinetic. We need to be initially more upfront with where we give our money away, to be and more accountable where our money goes, and we need to be more on the ground, and we need to make sure we're not investing too much intelligence in what locals tell us. And we learned all these wonderful lessons and making sure about infrastructure and all these things about, and I'm thinking Ukraine happened in 2022, 2023. Those are lessons we learned in Vietnam, Korea, Iraq, Afghanistan. And this guy, and again, that's not even going back to the proxy wars of all the Cold War. This guy is supposed to be an admiral, supposed to be telling people like me the truth, and he's pretending that we never fought a war like this before. This is the first time we paid another place to do a war on our behalf and sold them weapons. Not like we did in Vietnam and did prior to Korea before we messed up and did the same thing. And again, going back to all those Cold War countries. Oh, just like we recently did in Afghanistan. What? And then the media is up there letting this happen. And again, it infuriates me on many different levels. More so, that guy is a veteran. That guy swore an oath to defend the Constitution, to defend the country, to defend you and me. And he's up there pretending this is the first time we learned a lesson in a war. In 2022, by golly. It infuriates me. That guy was in charge of leading people, and he's either that stupid or that disingenuous. That's what really worries me. I don't know what worries me, that he was in charge, he went to get a degree and doesn't know we went to Vietnam. He has no idea recently we fought a war in Iraq. He doesn't know that. Or he knows it, and he'll lie right to your face. That infuriates me.
Other than that, try not to think about it. Try not to worry about it being so crowded. But someday we'll get out. Someday.